like, this idea of healing is like, my position is, if people can come from a place of trying not to judge one another, if someone shows up and they have a mask on, like, don't berate them.
Right.
They shouldn't berate you. Like, you're human. The people are not, we are not each other's enemy. Like, masked people, like, at the fundamental level, they want us to consider each other enemies. And it's very hard not to be challenged and upset by this. Like, I get that, but that's what they most want. And so actually, one of the ideas I had, I want to make some fabric with these dandelion, like, different slogans that I can print on canvas fabric and then sew on felt to make handmade buttons, like pins. And I want to do it it's very simple sewing, just up and down, you know, in a public place, in a park. Like, go somewhere public and sit and make something. And, you know, you could have some balloons or have some flowers or have whatever, and then just be there and see who comes up and has a conversation. Because bit by bit, that's the vibrational, like, for me, it is that kind of signals intelligence that is going to be countered to this hive mind mentality.
Right.
And it's not a huge numbers game. It can just be some. It doesn't have to be thousands.
Yeah. I've just started an organization. I'm calling it Network, which I know is kind of like a play, because network is usually a word used in like the computer realm, but it's offline. And what I want to do is set up cornhole boards, ladder ball games, bocce ball games, washer toss, frisbee, hacky sack, hula hoop, and literally just bring all the equipment in my pickup truck to the closest park, just throw it out there and invite some friends. And, you know, maybe 3 of them show up, maybe 10, 15 show up, and whatever happens, but we talk, you know, talk about these things and basically build community. Because I think ultimately, and I kind of, I see where you, I don't want to say avoid or ignore, but you kind of skirt the like economic or transactional, because that's not ultimately what's going to serve to heal us. What heals us is having a deeper relationship and understanding each other on more of a human level than like, this is someone that I can do business with, you know?
Yeah.
So
that was our intention. Like, our group intention on Sunday, we said it was like, as like beings connected to, you know, the Mother Earth, that our intention was to try to restore balance in ourselves and like among the earth as a whole. Like, it's this restoration of a balanced relationship from both with the humans and the larger world. And that's because everything's so profoundly out of balance right now.
Yeah. And this seems a little off topic, but back to something Daniel Quinn had mentioned when he was talking about biodiversity being an actual strength of the ecosystem. And we've actually weakened our own species by eliminating biodiversity within our own ecosystem or within the planet, because we're killing off all these species simply because they don't serve us. Or, you know, we've taken it's, you know, in the 1800s was the first time where a species was brought to extinction for purely commercial purposes. It wasn't even something that we ate. It was like their fur or their down feathers or something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but purely commercial purposes, we took an entire species to extinction just to serve what? Profit?
Well, and you know, that's one of these things. I mean, blockchain is about tracking supply chains largely too. Like, it's this, and that's being sold as like a wonderful thing. But what people aren't understanding is that we're the supply chain. We're being flipped from being the consumers to being the consumed by this system in this post-human world. And so we have to come to grips. And my friend Varun is very eloquent on sort of the psychosis of consumer culture, right? And sort of globalization, but understanding, you know, our impacts and like the chickens coming home to roost sort of thing. Really having a deeper reckoning with our relationship to the material world and identifying ourselves as consumer goods, you know, and increasingly as we become digitalized avatars and our consumption becomes digitized, but there's still this impact of, you know, the data centers and, you know, it's a different kind of environmental impact of that kind of digital consumerism and, you know, these NFTs. And it's just, it's kind of a whole crazy other layer of, you know, the digital virtual consumer world, but it's morphing because that's how capitalism, it needs to keep growing. And if if the left, if people who are under, like, and that's what I worry about on the, like the more libertarian side, people are understanding this isn't like, I'm going to control my small town. It's that the capitalism has gone into inverted into these virtual worlds, and that everything is becoming a market, a free market in trading and these cryptocurrencies of everything. And it's a little, yeah, it's a bit much for people to absorb. It's like you need to baby step people into it, but it's like, hurry, you know? So that's why I try to boil it down to natural life. Like we're in an epic spiritual engagement around natural life. Can we all get on board with that?
Yeah. One term that because of what you were just saying, one term I would maybe ask you to go a little bit deeper than some of the rest of the stuff on is social impact bonds.
Yeah.
I mean, that one really got me too. It's like, that's digital slavery is another term for it essentially. And that might sound radical, but when you look into it, that's what a social impact bond is.
It is. Well, so there's a really good lecture by Dr. Justin Leroy. It was like social impact bonds and the afterlife of slavery. And he did a whole, it's only like an hour long, but it's really foundational about sort of the legacy of slavery and the Zong massacre and the role of the insurance industries. But he gave it at the Whitney Museum of Art, actually, for a friend and colleague, Cameron Rowland, who was a ready-made artist. He did ready-made art around the carceral state. And so as part of this exhibit at the Whitney on debt, he used his allocation of funding to create art to buy a share in this social impact bond, this Ventura County impact bond around juvenile, offenders, and then displayed it because you could only get the terms of the bond if you bought in. So it's interesting now on the Ventura County social impact bond, the Whitney Museum of Art is a part owner in that bond, which is kind of an interesting fact. But so this idea of a social impact bond is essentially reimagining our lives and social relationships as future debt projections, and that there is an indebtedness that's tied to our use of public services, whether that's being educated, whether that is healthcare, whether that is housing, access or subsidies, food subsidies, being involved in the judicial system, getting substance treatment, being in foster care. All of these have numbers attached to them. And this is what social science centers at institutes at various Ivy League universities, they all set up these equations and these cost offsets. And then they say, well, if we can provide an evidence-based what works intervention, we will pay this much money, which is a smaller amount than we would pay if all these bad things happen to you and we would have to pay a lot more to fix you after the fact. We'll just preemptively fix you. Only the problem is it's essentially pre-crime. They don't say that, but it's essentially they're using all of these data analytics and predictive profiling to intervene in people's lives in really damaging ways. The profit center in the social impact bonds or pay for success finance is in that gap between what we pay for the current intervention and what we would have paid. So they take out a little slice for their profit. This concept was developed and scaled initially by social finance, which was backed by Sir Ronald Cohen, who was formerly with Apex Partners in the UK in London. And Peterborough Social Impact Bond was the first one. It was a prison one. So the cost offset was that people did not return to prison. Now, the problem is that the terms of these agreements, which are essentially like privatizing government services, privatizing services that the government should just be de facto providing, but then the government through austerity says we can't provide it unless we can be assured that it works. And so they outsource it to these nonprofits, some of whom are faith-based nonprofits, to do these social welfare services under conditions of a performance-based contract. The profit isn't in the tiny slice. That's what people need to understand. A lot of folks would say, well, I don't understand how you can make money privatizing social welfare. That doesn't seem very profitable. The problem is now there's a lot of poverty. So they're going to turn that all into profit. The profit isn't in the tiny slice of return on investment. It is actually in the fact that they're going to securitize all the debt and that hedge funds are going to trade off of that debt.
Right. And
but the game, the game can't go unless you have the structure. They can't run the bets unless the game goes on. So they have to build the game. And that game is being built right now. And it's alternately called, originally it was social impact bonds, and they couldn't bring those to scale. And then it was pay for success finance. Here, Michael Bloomberg brought that over from London with Sir Ronald Cohen to Rikers Island, was the first one in the United States. But now they have them tied to housing, pre-K, addiction treatment, like quite a number of other things. And really what they need, because to figure out the cost offset to legitimate it, even though it is illegitimate, but to make it seem like it's legitimate, they need all of the data to slosh around in a big pool, because they can't justify taking profit off the fact that you didn't become addicted if they can't track that against some intervention they put you on in middle school, right? They can't track if they got a cost offset, if they gave your parent a housing subsidy, that your test scores got better. All of that data has to interlock, and that's what's going to come with digital identity. And that digital identity system is something that the World Wide Web Consortium has been working on for like 15 years. And I had thought it was going to come through education transcript records, but clearly now it seems like the much bigger plan is to have it come through these medical passport protocols. So they'll set up the medical passports and then layer in the blockchain identity. They'll start to layer on your Fed wallet, right? Your blockchain Fed wallet, your programmable money, and all of the assets that you will get. It will be like starter money in a game of Monopoly, and that they will track you how you use it, if you're using it appropriately, and if you are behaving according to the protocols assigned to you by your social worker. So whether that's in addiction or workforce training, and with your QR codes and with your payments and with your tracking and with wearable technology and telehealth and teletherapies, they can really engineer people's lives to a degree that is almost unimaginable. And that is what people are not grasping now. That is that the blockchain and the digital identity and the spatial web is going to interface with programmable money and impact investing to create this global digital prison. And it is not far off, and it is not in China. This is something that is hatched in London and in New York City and in Chicago and the Bay Area. This is a colonial project.
Yep. One thing, when you were just going through the social impact, basically description there, that I remembered you saying from a previous podcast is, what's really scary about these things being basically hedge fund vehicles is that some people are going to short them.
Yeah.
So that means
and then you're living in the spatial web, potentially where things get out of hand and AI starts to influence how the physical world interfaces with you. And then maybe somebody's betting that you are unable to fulfill your obligations on this pathway, right? Like you don't get the bus. Your bank account is overdrawn. You're like, all of these contracts that you're interfacing with might go haywire, and there's not even a person to call up and go like, hey, I meant to get there on time, but the bus got detoured. Like, they'll fake you out.
And the people that are betting against you are going to do everything within the rules of the game to make sure that you don't succeed, because their money's on it.
So that is my fear around the crypto space, is that people are not understanding that it's Peter Thiel who's going to be, and Pierre Omidyar and, Branson and the Vatican and the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund and whatever. And like, now you've got the world running, with a bunch of robot police dogs running all over, like it's like, it literally, if you understand what it must have been like to try to escape slavery, this is what's coming. This plus the reservation system with cultural erasure, dispossession, reneged contracts, family separation, abuse, all of that is on our doorstep. And so to me, in order for us to engage with this from a spiritual standpoint, there has to be a reckoning and understanding of that history. Not from a woke, paralyzing standpoint, not from a like simply stand here and be shamed and into inaction, but to simply that we have to be able to process it in a principled way and then join together with that understanding of that history of who we are.
Yeah,
and that's where I've fallen out with most of the people on the left, because I don't think that they've gotten beyond, like, I've had people tell me, well, Alison, you don't really have a place speaking into this. And I'm like, no, I'm part of this equation. I'm not going to be here to tell a person in an impacted community how they should deal with it. I don't presume to tell people, but I feel it is my responsibility to share what I know with anyone who is willing to listen. And that includes white people. That includes the people who are building it. That includes people in Salt Lake City, where I went to give a number of talks because it's all being built there. That involves talking to people in Israel because it's being built there. I will talk to whoever I need to talk to say, don't put children on blockchain.
Right. Yep. And I think it harks back exactly to something that you said earlier, which is, I mean, ethics are absent from the public square discussion. I mean, I don't hear people talk about or even questioning the ethics behind any of this stuff. I mean, the ethical aspect of it seems to be people like you and the extreme minority, but ethics in general. I mean, I think, like you said, again, this stuff isn't new. And I think it's all the result of our culture has ignored the ethical aspect of all of this for centuries, really.
Well, I will say I'm in an unusual position because I can do it. And I understand a lot of people can't. Like, we live on a society that runs on debt.
Right? But anybody can have a discussion with their friend on what's right and what's wrong. And
that's true. And that may be happening offline and in less public ways. I don't want to put myself above other people. I think people have different positions in this machine. True. And so in that way, I have more freedom to speak on the things that I feel called to speak of. And because of my life experience being in a city that is being targeted by this, that I have eyes to see it in ways that other people may not.
Of course. I think where I was going is more like on a collective conscious level. I think, like, even talking about ethics seems to be almost taboo, unless there's already that rapport built between the two people having the discussion that, hey, we want to figure out, or we want to solve some problems, some societal problems. What's right, what's wrong, how do we do it? Whereas it almost seems like, because of the polarization, I think it starts in politics, but all the way down into academia, where, talking about ethics has almost reached the level of taboo, because it's like, oh, you don't want to offend somebody's religion or political stance. A lot of people don't even like talking about religion and politics. But
see, I think if we framed it as, how do we be better relatives? Because right now the propaganda and the media, it is meant to polarize.
Yeah, dividing.
So if you read most of what I write and what I know, it's totally bipartisan. All of this is bipartisan. Everybody's in on it. It's a power play. And I speak my truth. I don't change up how I talk depending on what the audience is or whatever. I speak the way I speak, but I try to be respectful. And I think if we understand each other's basic humanity and we frame it in that way, I think most people are receptive. It's surprising to me, to be very honest about, my beliefs, which are pretty strong, that most people get it. I don't get a lot of pushback. Mostly just the blockchain people. But if you look at my Twitter feed and you see who follows me on Twitter, I mean, I have 6,000 followers or whatever, it is a huge spectrum of people. Yeah. They are across, because I'm telling the truth.
Yeah. And I mean,
I'm trying to, as best I know it, I'm telling the truth of what I know from a place of caring for what happens to all the world, all the children of the world, all the creatures of the world. And most people, I think, get that. So if we come at it from that place, as opposed to trying to find each other's weak points and poke at them, we actually might get somewhere.
Beautifully put.
I mean, I know I'm just learning as I go along, but people have been surprisingly wonderful to me.
Yeah, no, that doesn't surprise me, because, like you said, you're honest and you're consistent. And overall, you're certainly not partisan. I don't get any like polarizing type of vibe from you at all. So
I'm like, they're all in on it.
Right.
It's like, right, people like, who do you trust, Alison? Like moms, you know, right. like people who don't have anything to gain from spinning this.
Right. Yeah.
We're not spinning it. When we hope we're wrong.